July 9th, 1943. Sicily. An American tank was rolling through the streets of a small Sicilian village. Looking for someone, they soon began calling out the Sicilian godfather, Don Duce, was finally going to get his revenge from the brutal dictator, Benito Mussolini. When Mussolini had risen to power, he wanted to revive the glory days of the Roman Empire and claim the role of emperor. But before he could continue his conquest, the defiant island of Sicily caught his attention. You see, Il Duce had heard all about the local godfathers, who for years controlled the island, where even the government could not keep them at bay. And under our new emperor, total obedience was non-negotiable. So he came to show these dons who's boss. He came with the full might of the Italian forces. But seeing this, Don Duce remarked to the dictator,
"Your Excellency, you have no need for all these guards. Here, you are under my protection. Nothing will happen to you."
If only he had access to the Culture Mafia, he wouldn't have made that blunder. Because this blunder would end up costing us everything. Now you can imagine how an egotistical dictator, hellbent on becoming a Roman emperor, would receive this comment. So he went all out. There was nothing he wasn't willing to do, no line he wasn't willing to cross in his crusade against the mafia. We were forced to go into hiding. Some of us escaped to New York. But there is something about us Sicilians you need to understand. We do not forget nor forgive that easily. This was not going to be the end. I guess the old saying, enemy of my enemy is my friend. So let me take you back. It all started in the early 20th century. Italy was in turmoil, and Mussolini saw an opportunity. He was a fiery speaker, charismatic, and he had a vision. He rallied those who were sick and tired of the chaos and the weak government. The black shirts, his squad of loyal enforcers, who essentially were like his capos, and they caused quite a stir in the streets. Mussolini used them to intimidate political opponents and create a climate of fear. Il Duce, they called him, and he had a personality that could command loyalty and fear in equal measure. He had this fiery, commanding presence, a unique sort of charisma. When he spoke, people listened. He exuded confidence and he believed in his own strength. He created a cult of personality. He was everywhere, on posters, in the news, and in people's minds. He played the strong man, and he promised to make Italy great again. In 1922, Mussolini decided it was time for a big move. He marched on Rome with his black shirts, like a mob boss taking control of the city. He demanded the king give him power, or else there would be chaos. The king, well, he didn't want bloodshed, so he handed over the keys to the kingdom. Mussolini, he became the prime minister, and he ruled with an iron fist. But he was just getting started. He had the fancy titles and costumes, but Mussolini was just as if not even more ruthless than any Sicilian don they ever seen. He made them look like Boy Scouts in comparison. He silenced opposition, abolished political parties, and made himself the head of the government. He was Il Duce, the boss of Italy, our new emperor. But before he could continue with grand plans, he needed to make sure he held an iron grip on the entire nation before he could voyage beyond. Like I mentioned to you earlier, he needed to make sure he had wiped out all his enemies, as well as really anyone who disputed the absolute authority of the fascist regime. It wouldn't be long before he concentrated on the defiant island of Sicily. Sicily seemed to be the only realm in the empire where he did not have total control over. And for the new emperor, that was not something he was willing to tolerate. But I know you might be thinking, what actually is the mafia, and why are they so powerful? Well, you can't tell the story of the mafia without understanding the history of Sicily. We will explore this very soon, so for now, here's what you need to know. The island was ruled by various foreign powers. They didn't exactly have the best interests of the local folks in mind. This left the Sicilians feeling pretty skeptical about the authorities and the central government. To protect themselves and their interests, they started forming their own groups based on kinship, loyalty, and honor.
An island that was invaded as much as Sicily. The people formed families so that they could have this trust within the family compound. You see. If you had this sense of loyalty, you could combat the invaders.
These groups also offered protection and justice to those who paid them a fee or tribute. Another piece of the puzzle was the economic and agricultural situation. Sicily was a big player in the citrus fruit business. The citrus industry was a gold mine, but it was also vulnerable to all sorts of problems like theft, vandalism, and pests. Landowners needed help guarding their crops and getting them to market safely. The Mafia stepped in to provide those services in exchange for a cut of the profits or even a piece of land. They didn't stop there. They soon started to control things like the water supply, the labor market, and various other vital elements of society. This made them pretty wealthy and powerful, and since they were all local Sicilians, there was a vital community factor to it. The Italian government found it extremely difficult to keep them at bay, especially since the locals understood the ramifications of cooperating with the authorities. May 1924, when the dictator visited the island, he was greeted by Don Francesco Cuccia, also known as Don Ciccio, the local godfather and town mayor. Looking at Mussolini's massive entourage and security detail, Don Ciccio remarked to the dictator,
Your Excellency, you have no need for all these guards. Here, you are under my protection. Nothing will happen to you.
Now, I'm sure you can guess how Mussolini received this. He then openly scorns the Don and makes it clear that any form of disobedience will not be tolerated. But it did not end there. When Mussolini went on to give one of his riveting speeches in the town square, accustomed to hearing thundering applause, he walked to an audience of beggars, homeless folk, and some drunkards. Of course, all courtesy of Don Cuccia. This was a mistake that the entirety of Sicily would have to suffer for. He had broken Law 1 of power. Mussolini demanded that all power reside with him, and the fact there could be someone else that could challenge his rule was simply unacceptable. The Mafia had finally met their match. He was not going to hold back. Palermo, November 1925. Cesare Mori is a name that still stings in the memory of the Sicilian underworld, and let me tell you, his rise was a force to be reckoned with. This was the guy that Mussolini appointed to crush the Mafia. Mori was actually a former cop who developed quite a reputation of being a man of action. He had the full backing of Mussolini himself to achieve his mission by any means necessary, no matter the implications. Mori did not hold back. He came down to our island like a bulldozer, relentless and ruthless. He unleashed a crackdown like a storm upon our organization. He hunted down our bosses, arrested our soldiers, and seized our assets. We didn't know what hit us. He used some of the worst forms of torture to get the confessions he wanted. He didn't play by the rules, and his methods were harsh, controversial even, but he was effective. He disrupted our operations, broke our code of silence, and created chaos in our ranks. He was a true enemy, a force of nature. He then soon became known as the Iron Prefect. But what really made Mori so infamous, so incredibly cruel compared to even the Mafia, was his siege on Gangi.
In Gangi, and he surrounded the village.
Several days into the siege and with no sign of a Mafia surrender, Mori ordered his men to start taking Gangi's women and children hostage. Then, one by one, the mafiosi gave themselves up.
He had a true understanding of how the Mafia's power worked. In order to truly crush it, he knew it was imperative to forge a direct bond between the people and the state, cutting out the middlemen who stood in the way of citizens reaching the authorities, those who transformed their rightful dues into mere favors bestowed. Now let me tell you, Mori's methods were not so different from the Mafia's own. He didn't just arrest the bandits, he made it his business to humiliate them too. His aim was to exhibit a forceful central authority that could stand toe-to-toe with the Mafia. In fact, that they were to be feared even more than the Mafia itself. And believe me, he often unearthed the Mafia's secrets, seizing their assets and livestock as a way of showing his unwavering determination. As vicious and ruthless his methods were, they worked. The Mafia's stranglehold over Sicily was pretty much decimated. Many mobsters went into hiding, and a large number managed to escape. Many of them ended up in the land of opportunity, America, where they still carried this resentment, but had their plates full. But what's really interesting is the fact that not all mobsters in the US shared this hatred for Mussolini and his fascist regime. Notorious mobster Vito Genovese was someone who had quite an interesting relationship with Il Duce. In 1934, Vito Genovese had allegedly ordered the murder of mobster Ferdinand Boccia, with whom he had schemed to cheat a wealthy gambler out of $150,000 during a high-stakes card game. Boccia's demand for a $35,000 share led to his fatal encounter in a Brooklyn coffee shop in September 1934, a grim example of the consequences of betrayal within the criminal underworld. By 1936, Lucky Luciano was sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison for pandering, leaving a power vacuum that Genovese, known for his cunning, filled as the acting boss of the Luciano crime family. In November 1936, he became a naturalized U.S. citizen in New York City, but the heat from the Boccia murder prompted him to flee to Italy in 1937 with $750,000 in hand, settling near Naples. Frank Costello assumed leadership in his absence, while in Italy, Genovese developed ties with powerful fascist figures, most notably Galeazzo Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law. He also made substantial financial contributions to Mussolini's fascist party, ultimately donating nearly $4 million by the end of World War II. He received awards and recognition from the fascist regime and played a role in establishing a new party headquarters in Nola, cementing his alliance with the ruling powers. In 1943, Genovese was rumored to have ordered the assassination of Carlo Tresca, a thorn in Mussolini's side. Tresca, the publisher of an anarchist newspaper in New York, was shot and killed outside his office in Manhattan on January 11, 1943. Although Carmine Galante of the Bonanno crime family was alleged to be the triggerman, no one was ever charged in connection with the murder. Such were the complexities and mysteries of loyalty and alliances in those times, where disputes often ended in violence and those responsible often remained elusive. But as for the Sicilians back home, the future looked as bleak as ever. They would need a miracle for things to change. January 14, 1943. Allied leaders met in Casablanca, Morocco, to discuss and plan their strategy for the next phase of the war. One of the most pressing matters was how to begin the invasion of Europe. This was quite a decisive time of the war, and they needed to be quick, but it was not that simple. The Germans knew that the Allies' next move would be to find a way into Europe, and there were only a few logical options that they could take, one being Greece and the other, the island of Sicily. In the end, after much debate, they decided that the best way to enter the rest of Europe was through Sicily. But now they needed to convince the Germans that the attack was going to take place in the south of Greece. So they set up an elaborate deception plot called Operation Mincemeat, where they convinced the Germans that the invasion would occur in Greece. And sure enough, it worked, and bought the Allies some time. Now they can just focus on the actual invasion. Problem is, they did not have enough intel on the island, and the local Sicilians were not being very cooperative, again fearing the wrath of the Mafia. Sicily was the ideal location to begin the invasion, however, they simply were not ready to invade just yet. Gathering all the intel they needed was going to take a lot of time they simply didn't have. But with the invasion date set, they grew somewhat desperate. They would need to get this information before the Germans find out. Time was running out. Luckily, there was one man that could solve this conundrum. So on May 7th, 1942, a group of mobsters, lawyers, naval officers, and government officials head for Dannemora prison, otherwise known as Little Siberia, to meet with the godfather of the mob, the man who organized crime, Charles Lucky Luciano. This wasn't the first time the government had allied themselves with Luciano, and to their surprise, he once again complied, even suggesting that he himself should be on the battlefield to aid in the invasion. They passed on that suggestion, but welcomed any intel he could help them gain. Luciano was actually born in Palermo and maintained a positive relationship with his relatives over there. But more importantly, possessed some very important connections to the Sicilian Mafia. More vitally, to the most powerful man in Sicily, godfather of the Sicilian Mafia, Don Carlo Vizzini. And so, when he put the word out, the Navy began to receive all kinds of vital intel. But this time, lucky for them, the Sicilian Mafia needed little convincing. In fact, they rejoiced when they heard they could help end the brutal reign of the fascist government. And so they were willing to do a lot more than just share intel. The Unlikely Alliance, July 9th, 1943. At 2:45 a.m., 2,600 Allied ships descended on the shores of the island of Sicily, carrying over 160,000 troops, who then stormed the southeast beaches of the island. This would be the largest beach landing in history, prior to the Normandy landings, aka D-Day. And when they arrived, they would soon meet up with their mafia counterparts, who would provide them with invaluable services. It didn't take the American troops long to start making headway. On the very first day, a group of Navy lieutenants, with the help of the Mafia members, managed to seize the headquarters of the Italian Naval Command on the island. Inside, they stumbled upon a gold mine maps detailing minefields in the waters around Italy and Europe, along with other vital documents that were like gold for U.S. naval intelligence. It said that the day after Don Carlo took control up there in the heights near Monte Camerata, overlooking the way to Palermo, Commander Lieutenant Colonel Salemi had most of his troops abandon him. Some of the Italian soldiers said that Mafia members came to them during the night, telling them things were hopeless and offering them regular clothes to escape and be with their families. And with most of the local population on their side, giving them all the intel they needed, in addition to the Sicilian Mafia acting as a resistance force, the Allies, well, at least the Americans, swept through Sicily, delivering a crushing blow to the Axis powers. Unlike their British counterparts, who had received what seemed to be the brunt of the occupying force, they actually made a lot of progress and led a fairly fast campaign. Thanks to the Sicilian Mafia, you have to understand, this was a major victory for the Allies, a decisive moment in the war. With this inside information, the U.S. military swiftly secured the entire western side of the island in just 2 weeks after landing. Their progress was lightning fast, and this was a monumental victory for the military. The Battle of Camerata was a victory without a single shot fired, and General Patton made it to Messina just 2 hours before Montgomery, which marked the end of the campaign in Sicily. Even though the war was far from over, this victory opened up a new front against the Germans. Some consider this as being the beginning of the end for the Axis powers. Sicilian revenge. Revenge is a dish best served cold. After Sicily was taken over, the Allied military government, AMGOT, had some real issues keeping things orderly. They got rid of the fascist political leaders, which left a kind of power gap. The Mafia saw their chance and started filling these roles with people they supported. Some of these Mafia-backed Sicilian separatists, like Lucio Tusca, who became the acting mayor of Palermo, got into key political positions. The Allies didn't plan to put the Mafia back in power. They sort of missed it happening, especially because the Mafia had gained influence during the war when the Nazis left the island. After the liberation, the Mafia felt more confident and began to carry out bold crimes, like stealing a bunch of stuff from Allied warehouses. The war was still going on in other places, and the Allies couldn't spare the resources for a big fight against the Mafia. So they tried to keep them satisfied, like making Don Carlo Vizzini the mayor of Villaba, where he became known as the king of the post-war black market. Giuseppe Genco Russo, who was close to Don Carlo, became the mayor of Mussolini. These Mafia members, along with others, played a big part in securing the Mafia's control over Sicily. September 2nd, 1945. 2 years after the conquest of Sicily, the Allies had come out victorious. The history we've uncovered here serves as a chilling reminder that the secret, often unholy, liaisons between those in power and the underworld don't merely fade away. The The mysterious underbelly of such collaborations, fraught with whispers, hidden agendas, and clandestine deals, isn't easily laid to rest. It's a tale that often unfolds in the shadows, where truth remains obscured and motives enigmatic. This story doesn't end here. Watch this video to see how this story unfolds. If you want even darker documentaries that have been hidden from you for years, comment below and make sure you are part of the Culture Mafia.